Hey everybody, this is Trevor from Polymath, and I'm here today, to connect with you guys. I'm really excited. Haven't done one in a little while, and we're excited to kind of get these sessions going and get the cadence of connecting with our community back up to very regular. And I'm excited because Polymesh is the topic of today, and this is our layer one security token blockchain. This has been a passion of mine since the early days of Polymath. Assembling the right people and the right resources to be able to pull this off. And I think, building something as consequential as the backbone of a new decentralized financial system is worth talking about, and it's worth sending the message out to the world. And I really truly believe more than ever, I'm more convicted than ever that the mega trend of security tokens is happening. We see growth and building every day, and we want to make sure that it's built on a solid foundation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you the story behind Polymesh. It all started in Barbados. We were in a small room with the co-founders of Polymath and some technical advisors, and we had a big inflection point in the project. We had to decide where to launch our token, either to launch it on another chain or to launch it on our own chain. And this was a big kind of strategic decision we had to make. And ultimately, we decided to go with Aetherium because it made sense at the time. Aetherium was a project we were familiar with. We knew all the co-founders really well. We were active in the community. But most importantly, Aetherium was live. It was a sandbox that we could play in and experiment in. And what it allowed us to do was focus on distribution. That was a big strategic decision that I made at the time, was that distribution is going to be the winning model when it comes to blockchain adoption. In other words, if you just focus on tech and no one uses your chain, then you're not going to have a thriving ecosystem and a thriving network. So my idea and our team's idea was to say, hey, why don't we focus on distribution first, get traction, do it on someone else's technology like Aetherium, who we know, trust, and like, and then ultimately decide what to do in the future. And that's what we did. But there was a little problem as we started to scale, and as we started to continue to launch issuers and other security tokens. It became crystal clear to us that Aetherium was actually not an ideal home for security tokens. And we say this with all love because Aetherium, I was very involved in the early days right here in the backyard in Toronto. But it wasn't designed for security tokens. That's pretty obvious in retrospect. I sometimes joke that the Ethereum co-founders didn't dream of how to make securities more efficient. That wasn't the use case that they had in mind when they were architecting Ethereum. And to be more specific, Ethereum, I remember the t-shirts in the early days. It was unstoppable applications. It was permissionless. It was anonymous. And it was this really powerful, sexy idea of this world computer. And unfortunately, that doesn't really reconcile very well with securities regulations. And they're kind of opposite, unstoppable and then regulated. It doesn't really reconcile very well. And these two conflicting missions is one of the reasons we built Polymath, because we wanted to be a compliance first project. And to sum this up in one sentence, Ethereum's best utility token features that we all love and have used in the past are bugs when it comes to the regulated world of security tokens. And this brings us to our thesis. The security tokens of the future will not live on blockchains of the past. And this is something that the world, I think, is starting to kind of nod in agreement. We had this thesis for a while now, but now it's becoming pretty clear, and especially from our ground level view of talking to businesses and issuers and regulators every day, it's clear to us that the security tokens of the future will choose to live on a purpose-built, compliance-focused blockchain. And that's why I'm so excited to reiterate our vision and our mission behind Polymesh, the new institutional-grade security token blockchain initiative. And my comment is that this is fulfilling the original mission of Polymesh, of Polymath. which was our layer 2 on top of Ethereum. And now it's time to build a brand new foundation from the ground up. A quick analogy I'd like to make is that history shows that purpose-built specific use cases are going to replace convenience. And what I mean by that is, just think about the internet. When the internet was getting started, there needed to be new infrastructure that it hooked into, so you could actually, service, thousands and then hundreds of thousands, eventually millions of people. And the way we did that as an industry is we use phone lines, because that was convenient. And phone lines weren't built for the internet. You guys probably remember the dial-up 56K modems and all that stuff. And it works. And it was a great testing ground for us to kind of prove that the internet was useful. And I think all the architects of the infrastructure knew that eventually it would have to be replaced, and eventually something more custom and purpose-built would have to replace it. And that's where fiber came. And that's where, and now even newer infrastructure that's been floated around. That is what's replacing the old, is the new that's purpose-built. And the analogy here is pretty obvious to us. It's Ethereum is the general purpose blockchain. And security tokens are a subset of that. They're a specific use case, one that we think is a gigantic specific use case, but nonetheless, a specific use case that needs something that's purpose-built. And underpinning all this, you can see in the middle slide, is users are demanding this upgrade. This isn't just, us trying to chase a problem. We have, and during the AMA, we'll get into a lot more specifics on the exact requests and needs of our customers and future customers. But for now, just take my word for it that there's a lot of pent-up demand for new technology that can support the needs of our users and customers. A few things, again, I won't get too much into the weeds, but some of the tenets and the pillars that we're building this blockchain on are confidentiality and auditability. And these are two things that aren't inherent and baked in natively into certain layer 1 protocols today that security tokens tend to live on. One quick stat before I dive into this section is security tokens are dominated by Ethereum today. 90–95% of security tokens today live on Ethereum. So you can see how big of an opportunity that is, considering that a lot of those issuers are kind of asking for certain custom features that Ethereum can't provide. So that's why we're looking at things like this auditability concept, meaning regulators are going to love this, and they have indicated to us in conversations that blockchain isn't their enemy, it's their friend. It's more orderly, it's more transparent. You can actually see the breadcrumb of all the transactions that have happened, and if you have the right KYC systems on top of that, then it's even more secure than the current system we have. And another concept of trusted gatekeepers that we're super excited about, meaning we have nodes in the network that are real institutions that are overseeing the network and validating transactions. And we're super excited about kind of this new model that we'll get into more detail next time. And confidentiality, this is a big one. It turns out that Wall Street is a competitive place, and information is plentiful, but information that gives you an edge is scarce, and you want to protect the advantages that you have. And if you're broadcasting your trades and your transactions publicly on a public permissionless ledger, then you're at a competitive disadvantage. So whatever blockchain is going to win the layer 1 security token wars is going to have some concept of privacy and confidentiality of transactions baked in to its core. And finally, I see that handsome man on the front page in front of us. That is Charles Hoskinson. I just got back from Denver last weekend, spending time with him. He is a dear friend of mine. We spent many days and many weeks together in the early days of Ethereum, and I was just blown away by not just his kind of technical genius, but also the way he executes and the way he manages and the way he keeps people accountable. And this man needs no further introduction. He is Charles Hoskinson, the co-founder of Aetherium and Cardano. These are two top 10 projects in terms of many metrics. And he is the Polymesh co-architect. And I couldn't be more excited to have those words come out of my mouth, because we're very fortunate, we're very lucky. As you know, Charles has a lot on his plate. He's a very busy man, but he was so excited about this opportunity and this problem that's staring us in the face, this big hairy problem that's going to need a boatload of technical innovation. And Charles Hoskinson, native of Denver, Colorado, is our proud co-architect of this, and we spend an inordinate amount of time with him, kind of learning from him and getting guidance from him on how to do this. And we're super excited to have Charles on our team. So with that said, guys, thanks for tuning in. This is a little preview show, and I'm really excited for the main event coming soon. And please reach out to me at Trevor Koverko on all the channels, and I'd love to connect there as well.
Hey, I'm Adam Dossa, the head of blockchain at Polymath. Back in May at Consensus, we announced an incredibly exciting new initiative to build and launch a new securities-focused blockchain codenamed Polymesh. The very talented engineering team here at Polymath, alongside our co-architect Charles Hoskinson, have been hard at work nailing down the architecture of Polymesh and building towards the testnet. I wanted to take a few minutes to outline our broad vision for Polymesh and focus on how we are architecting and engineering a blockchain which is laser focused on bridging the gap between regulated compliant securities and open and decentralized finance. Polymesh has both an enabling economy and an enabled economy. The enabling economy forms the building blocks that ensure a trustless and decentralized ledger whose characteristics are tuned for the regulated securities domain. The enabled economy is where issuers, investors, and service providers interact with the chain to issue, trade, and manage the full securities lifecycle. Both economies, enabling and enabled, utilize Poly to incentivize and structure themselves, adding significantly to the Poly utility that we have today on our Ethereum protocol. So let's dive into the enabling economy. This is the part of the blockchain that includes our consensus and block production mechanism. Polymesh will use a form of proof-of-stake consensus which emphasizes fast block production with absolute finality. This is in contrast to proof-of-work blockchains such as Ethereum, where finality is probabilistic and depends on how deeply a transaction is buried in the proof-of-work chain. Our analysis and discussions with partners and with financial institutions has made it clear that there are significant issues with this type of approach, ranging from the speed and throughput of the chain to the routing of payments to unknown miners, as well as probabilistic finality and the potential for chain reorganizations. In contrast, Polymesh's consensus protocol provides absolute finality, a guarantee that once a block or a chain of blocks has been finalized, this cannot be subsequently reverted. This guarantee is underpinned by the Poly staked against the security of the chain. In order to ensure that the security of the chain incorporates as large a stake as possible from a diverse set of stakeholders, there are two categories of entity involved in securing the chain. The first category are validators. Validators are reputable and permissioned organizations who are required to run authoring nodes with high reliability and availability, who order and produce blocks, as well as vote on the finality of blocks produced by other validators. They will stake Poly in order to act as validators and will be introduced through a governance process to ensure that only suitable organizations with appropriate reputation and known identity fulfill this role. Nominators are other Poly holders who participate by selecting one or more of the known validators to support through staking their own Poly to those validators. Nominators do not need to run nodes and instead fulfill the function of helping to create the validator set through their choice of which validators to support, as well as adding cumulative security to the blockchain by increasing the amount of Poly staked in the system. Both validators and nominators share equitably and proportionally in block rewards in Polymesh, and are also both subject to slashing conditions if, for example, a validator fails to fulfill their role as a result of malicious activity by the validator. We put a lot of thought and time into designing a robust tokenomics for block rewards token inflation, network treasury, and gas mechanics to ensure that Polymath's enabling economy is secure, stable, and sustainable in the long term and drives the utility of Poly. There will be more detail to come here as we work with expert partners in tokenomics to pin down the parameters of this system. So, now that we have a secure and fit-for-purpose enabling economy, let's talk about what the enabled economy, which lives on top of this, looks like. Our vision with Polymesh is to provide a public and permissioned blockchain which is fit for purpose to issue, distribute, trade, and manage securities across jurisdictions globally. Leveraging our technical and product experience of building a Layer 2 securities protocol on Ethereum and the standardization process of ERC 1400, we've designed a collection of financial primitives that supports all needed operations on regulated securities. As well as these financial primitives, which are baked into the base layer of the chain, Polymesh also provides the flexibility to augment this functionality through smart extensions, which can be dynamically deployed to the blockchain by Polymath or other third-party developers through smart contracts that fulfill certain interface specifications and constraints. A good example of this is our regulated asset primitive. This captures the core functionality associated with tokenized assets at layer 1, whilst allowing developers to craft custom compliance rules by deploying smart extensions that represent those rules. The smart extensions are WASM-based smart contracts which can be deployed dynamically. This means Polymesh is both modular and future-proof, whilst providing a native structure that is common across all securities. Another example of a really important primitive is identity. Identity is core to everything we are doing with Polymesh, and a clear, universal, flexible model of identity is critical to giving institutional investors and issuers the confidence to bring their assets and value to Polymesh. This general approach of providing key financial primitives at layer 1, which are missing in today's general purpose blockchains, whilst allowing dynamic business logic extensions for key functions such as compliance rules, primary offering, and secondary trading to be added in layer 2, is a novel and exciting approach not yet seen in this space. As Polymesh develops and matures, we will also add the capability for developers to build out complete open finance and DeFi protocols on Polymesh that can seamlessly interact with regulated securities. For example, to provide borrowing and lending services for market leverage, or using securities as collateral in a decentralized but compliant manner. As in the enabling economy, Poly is fundamental to the enabled economy. Interactions with the blockchain will have fees associated with them, which will be paid only in Poly, and any economic interactions between users and third-party developers who build smart extensions for our financial primitives will also be paid in Poly. Confidentiality is a critical aspect of Polymesh, and we are working with world-leading cryptographers and institutions to specify a form of confidentiality which carefully balances privacy with auditability. This is an area which we are deeply researching right now and expect to release more details in the coming months on our novel approach, which looks to provide similar flexible functionality for both confidential and non-confidential assets. The engineering team here at Polymath is world-class, mixing deep technical know-how with top-tier industry experience. We're approaching the end of our initial engineering phase with working proof of concepts for many of the key components discussed here. I'm truly excited to be sharing our progress and look forward to opening up our codebase and digging into more details as we progress with our development. Polymath has been a lead engineering team in the Ethereum ecosystem since its inception, and we're now extending and building upon all of that experience and knowledge to build out Polymesh, the blockchain that is built from the ground up for regulated securities and open finance. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Thomas here from Polymath to update you on Polymesh and Poly. The number one question that we've had across all the channels has been, with that announcement of the Polymesh blockchain initiative, the purpose-built security token blockchain, what does that mean to Poly? And specifically, what does that mean to the ERC20 Poly, the Poly that lives on Ethereum? What's going to happen when Polymesh goes to mainnet? And so here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a one-to-one swap. So For every ERC20 poly, you'll be able to swap that poly for a poly on Polymesh. That's what will be completely optional. It's entirely up to you. You make the decision to either keep your ERC20 poly or swap it for a Polymesh poly. And to do that, you'll use a bridge that's going to be operated for at least a year after the mainnet launch. So you'll have plenty of time to swap your ERC20 polys for Polymesh polys. Now, as you remember, Polymesh is the security token blockchain. It is purpose-built for securities. And as a result, it has to comply with stringent regulations, one of which is KYC. And so to provide the right environment for those securities, that swap of ERC20 polys to Polymesh polys will require the ERC20 poly holders to go through KYC so they can receive that Polymesh polys. Again, that swap is optional. It's entirely up to you. You decide whether or not you want to keep your ERC20 polys or convert them into Polymesh polys. Now, when we talk about Poly, we have to talk about the utility of Poly as well. And in the Ethereum world, Poly is used as the access token. This is what allows you, it's the token that allows you to register your tickers, create your token, program and schedule and configure an STO and run the STO. And so this will continue to be the case on Polymesh, but over and above that, you're going to have new and increased utility of Poly, specifically around transaction fees. Polymesh is fueled by Poly, so Poly is used on Polymesh to pay for transaction fees. Polymesh uses a proof-of-stake consensus protocol, which means you have validators, and those validators are going to have to stake Poly to contribute to the security of Polymesh. And in doing so, they're going to receive rewards that are going to be denominated in Poly as well. So they will receive rewards in Poly. A third case for Poly is nominators. So as a Poly holder, you will be able to nominate Poly to validators and receive rewards in Poly. So what you'll be able to do as a Poly holder is select from a list of validators which ones you nominate your Poly to, transfer your Poly to them, and as the validators received Poly as a reward to contribute to the security of Polymesh, you will receive a fraction of that based on the agreement that is put forward by the validators. So 3 new cases in the utility of Poly over and above the existing utility of Poly as the access token to the network, the token that you use to acquire services and functionality within the Polymath network. Now, the next question is around the Poly supply and the block rewards. So to reward the validators for securing Polymesh, the validators will earn Poly. And upon mainnet launch, the Poly earned by the validators will be subsidized by the Polymath Reserve. Now, over time, the subsidy from the Polymath Reserve will be adjusted based on supply. And last but not least, nominators will receive a portion of the validator's reward as established by each validator. So each validator will indicate what percentage they provide as reward to nominators that nominate them, and that will, as a nominator, provide you the data to select effectively who will be a set of data points for you to select which validators you want to nominate. Now, with the supply, obviously comes the question of how is the reserve handled, and all of you know that polys, ERC20 polys, are unlocked according to a schedule. So upon Polymesh mainnet launch, Polymath will begin moving its reserve from ERC20 poly to Poly on Polymesh using the same conversion bridge as everyone. And as subsequent ERC polys are unlocked and available and added to the Polymath reserve, Polymath will convert those on a schedule from ERC20 Poly to Poly on Polymesh. Now, keep in mind that ERC20 Poly unlocking schedule will remain the same. In other words, there is no change to how Poly are being unlocked on Ethereum. And that unlock schedule that we have until January 2021 continues to be the case. And it's as these tokens get unlocked that they will over time be converted from ERC20 Poly to Poly on Polymesh. Now, much like we've talked about the conversion or the swap from ERC20 Poly to Poly, obviously we need to talk about what is happening to security tokens and how that migration is going to take place. Our goal is to deliver a seamless, easy-to-use migration program for security token issuers from Ethereum to Polymesh. So if you're wondering right now whether you should be creating your security token on Ethereum or wait until Polymesh goes live, then you really don't have to wait, in the sense that as Polymesh goes live, as Polymesh mainnet goes live, you will be able to convert or migrate rather your security token from Ethereum to Polymesh. And that process will have no fees associated with that migration. In other words, Polymath will not have any fees that are required for you to migrate your token from Ethereum-based to Polymesh. So we've talked about Polymesh going live quite a bit, but now let's talk about the schedule. When is Polymesh going to go live? What is our roadmap? Now, obviously, a roadmap is always something that comes with a certain level of risk, and so please do take those dates with a grain of salt. Our team, ever since the announcement, and even prior to the announcement back in May of 2019 at Consensus New York, the team has been working very, very hard and very diligently, both on research and coding and development, and working towards a very aggressive schedule. So what we're currently targeting for the Polymesh version 1 testnet launch is Q2 of 2020, and for the Polymesh v1 mainnet launch is Q4 of 2020. So again, these dates come with a certain amount of risk, so don't make your decision on whether or not you want to engage Polymath based on those dates. These are for your information only, but we'll continue to keep everyone updated and subsequent AMAs as we get closer to these dates. But right now, we're continuing to drive towards a very aggressive schedule of having a Polymesh v1 testnet in Q2 of 2020 and a Polymesh v1 mainnet in Q4 of 2020. All right, so just to summarize what we just talked about, ERC20 Poly to Polymesh Poly, one-to-one swap over a bridge. That bridge will be available for an extended period of time after Polymesh goes live. Utility, we already know the existing utility of Poly. It is the access token for the Polymath network. That's how you register your ticket, create your token, schedule your STO, and that will continue to be the case. But over and above that, you will use Poly to pay for transaction fees. Validators in our proof of stake consensus will use Poly to stake. And as Poly holders, you'll be able to nominate validators and be paid a reward in Poly, just like the validators will, but be paid a fraction of the validators' reward in Poly as a nominator for nominating those validators. Supply and rewards, we've talked about that in detail. The reserve will be migrated from ERC20 Poly to Polymesh Poly. The schedule on ERC20 Poly doesn't change. And roadmap, slide that we're looking at, a very aggressive schedule, but we're very bullish on it. The team's been working very, very hard and continues to do that. So we're all moving forward and shooting for these dates. So thanks again for your time. We're going to have an AMA on September 10th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So very much looking forward to that. Thanks for watching this video, and we look forward to chatting with you on the 10th. Thanks, everyone.